Alright, this is going to be a very brief track guide for Las Vegas and the Gen 4 Cup car. As you can see here, it was kind of a 12 and a half lap run. I actually got in the wall a little bit on the 13th lap and got loose, so I just cut it there. But this is just kind of showing you some lap times. I'll show you kind of what I'm looking at when I'm driving the course, and then I did a mock qualifying run. Just for reference, this was my tires after that 12 and a half laps. So main thing to look at, 93 on the front. Look at the center one. 89 on the right rear, which tells you that you're going to get looser and looser as the run goes, and that just kind of seems typical at this track. A few things that you can change on the fixed setup. It would be under chassis here, but you can do brake bias, steering ratio, and your steering offset. Steering ratio is kind of your own personal preference. Some people will tell you otherwise and what to run, but ultimately I think that's personal preference. Brake bias, it seems like they always put standard at 68% in the Gen 4 fixed setups, which I think is way too high. I usually drop it down to like 62, but that ultimately ends up being personal preference. If you find yourself spinning out on quarter entry, that means your brake bias is probably too low. If you're kind of like plowing like a dump truck on entry, it could mean your bias is too high, or you could also just be driving in too far into the corner. Anyways, for this I did run 62%. So coming to start finish line, going into turn one, you're going to drive qualifying and race completely different. You're going to have to decide whether you're going to plan on saving some tire or if you're going to plan on using them up more and struggle more on the long run. But brake marker, I'm looking at a little bit after these couple dots on the track. There's this little, I think it's your typical. I'm trying to think who owns this track, but it's their little logo for the track. So that's kind of where I'm braking at. I do a very light trail brake. When I say trail brake, I'm talking probably only 10-15%. It might end up being a little bit more, but then I'm easing out of it. There's multiple grooves here. The bottom groove has a lot of bumps in it. They're pretty bad. The very bottom is very difficult to run with any type of speed. Um, this first seam here, kind of straddling your left side's just below that or right above that, seems to be pretty solid. Um, Same with this second seam up here. This is kind of, you can see the groove shaded in here. Somewhere in there is good. You can run multiple grooves. I'll show you some instances of me doing it at the last few laps of this. These were my first laps out on the track, so these laps may not be optimal. The qualifying I felt pretty confident about, but you can't be full throttle. You can see I'm still 75% throttle here, and then I'm getting to full throttle on exit. If you're trying to get back to full throttle when you're still in the center of the turn, you're just gonna really burn the right rear off and be hanging on for dear life. Kind of 60-75% throttle, and then I'm up to full throttle here. So really not full throttle until you're off the turn. A little bit of brake, kind of just letting it hover around 75-80% throttle, and then full throttle. It's gonna be the same thing here. Running kind of a little bit above that seam I was talking about here. That seems pretty comfortable for me. You can move around as you are trying to set up a pass or anything. You don't want to run your crazy alternate lines long term, I don't think, because you're going to end up burning your tires up a little bit more. Like, you can run high to try and get to somebody's outside and complete a pass, but you're not going to want to run that for 20 laps in a row, I wouldn't think. Kind of straddling this first seam. If you go a bit below this is where you really get into the bumps. The bumps are really bad in turn 1 and 2. You can also use those little dashes on the track surface as you're going through the corner to kind of gauge where you're at as you're going through the corner. At some point in here I do mix up the line a little bit. I was kind of feeling it out these first few laps, but just for a good safe get around the track line, kind of hugging that first groove. I go a little bit lower here for 3 and 4. It seems like you can get comfortably a little bit lower in 3 and 4 because it's not as bumpy, but it does get a little bit loose down on the bottom side. Yeah, I run a little bit higher here. So you're going to sacrifice a little on entry, but you're going to gain some speed on exit. I think I do it again next lap and I get into the wall off of turn 2 because I just kind of got a little bit too close. But again, I'm running that similar line here, maybe not quite as high. I think it's the lap that I get into the wall. Try to carry too much speed. Yeah. It's just ever so slight. This car tends to get stuck on the wall like glue. Anyone that's driven it a fair amount, and I think it's just because of the odd shape of the car. Since it wasn't uniform back then by any reach of the imagination. Back to this is below that bottom seam. You can see how bumpy it is. I don't like that. I'm getting really loose here, but I don't like that very bottom seam in 1 and 2. I kind of like being a little bit closer to that. Or I shouldn't say seam, line. I like being close to that first seam, avoiding the bumps. Running a little bit higher there. I was just kind of mixing it up through this run, trying to show off some alternate lines. Back to middle. I think I was trying to alternate, kind of cycling through bottom, middle, high, and then back to middle, and then back to bottom. And then eventually I think, like I said on lap 13, I end up spinning out. I think I spin it. Yeah, I spin out. Just do it a little bit too much. I do envision as you get further and further into a run that your right rear is gonna be struggling more and more. I think this lap's a little bit slower. Running the very bottom, yeah, 527 compared to the ones around it. You can run it. I just, like I said, don't think that starting to get looser and looser, and I was also trying to push it more. I ended up spinning out on this lap, but forget. I think I'm running, yeah, I run up high again. I actually ran this line really well, carried a lot of good speed. on exit, but then I trying to run that same line of 3 and 4, I end up losing it. Well, I end up saving it. I was getting really loose. Anyways, let's take a look at what a qualifying run would look like. Obviously, you're not going to want to drive it nearly this hard in a race run because your tires will be absolute trash after probably 5 to 10 laps and you won't be able to hang on to it. But really aggressively driving into the corner a little bit deeper than normal and backing the throttle pretty hard. I think that first seam is going to be your optimal line for qualifying. My second lap ends up being a little bit quicker. It would have been even faster, but I do get a little loose on the bottom in 3 and 4 if I recall, and just lose a little bit of speed. Just fighting it a little bit too much, trying to get every bit out of it. Yeah, I run lower than I wanted to. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, where you can start getting loose down there. Ideally, I would have run probably another half car width up. If you got questions, let me know.